But to be the man, you gotta beat the man. And I'm saying, woo, right here in Nashville, Tennessee, pal, I'm the man. Ric Flair and Steamboat, you're gonna be mine. Woo!
Welcome to Last Match Standing, the podcast where we review, relive, and rank the 100 greatest wrestling matches of all time. As always, I'm Spencer.
Woo! I'm Rick. Sorry, I'm Paul.
I'm Landon.
And today, we have one of those matches that will affect this show in one of two ways. Either this podcast becomes valid, or this will be your last time listening to us. And if that's the case, we really appreciate it. But it is definitely one of those matches that is the measuring stick in a lot of different people's minds. And today, we're going back to 1989.
It's a very good year.
For WrestleWar for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. The Nature Boy Ric Flair versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Whenever people talk about the rivalries that define pro wrestling history, this is one of the most influential rivalries for everyone. They had a trio of matches here that are looked at as some of the greatest wrestling matches of all time.
Absolutely, and all three of them could be on this list. You know, we're doing this one, and it might be the only one that gets on this list. I don't know. We haven't really gone that far down the road yet. We're only 13 matches in, but these three matches each are pretty different from each other.
Oh yes, very, very different.
Right? And in different ways, they are largely considered the greatest series of matches of all time in a lot of people's eyes.
I'm one of those wrestling fans that I'm inclined to believe it, even though I've really only seen this one. I've actually never seen the other two.
And so this is one of those matches that has been recommended to us by a number of folks. Mm-hmm. And so it was pretty easy whenever we were sitting down. We were talking about, do we want to do a Twitter poll? Do we want to do something that we just know people keep showing us? And we've noticed that the old school matches, anything older than 1990 hasn't really been getting a lot of love. So we wanted to make sure to branch out and to make sure that those folks that are asking for those older matches are kind of getting what they want to hear as well. And this is one of those matches that was easy to pick.
Well, I think it's important, too, because we talk about a lot on our list about how the rankings are affected by impact, right? And we can't say that and not include one of the most impactful rivalries in the history of the sport.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we touch on this one for sure. And just if you don't know and you're not aware of these series of matches, it started in February of 1989 with the Chi-Town Rumble on February 20th. And that's where the Dragon actually beats Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight Championship in the first of the three series that ends up coming. The next one is at Clash of Champions 6, which is actually in New Orleans.
In the Dome.
Raging Cajun, April 2nd, where Steamboat successfully retains the title. But at the end of that match, it was a 2 out of 3 falls match. The very last fall, Steamboat pins Flair, but his foot is on the bottom rope or underneath the bottom rope. So there's a little bit of controversy there, which sets up this third and final encounter at WrestleWar 89.
Oh, yeah. So, but basically for the Clash of Champions 6, not only was Rick's feet into the rope, but when he had him locked in the chicken wing, both men's shoulders were also down. So it was a question of, okay, who's pinning who? And it was so much like kerfuffle that both men kind of said, okay, well, we have not settled this. Even though Steamboat has beaten Flair twice, we do not have a definitive winner. And they're both were like, okay, that's it. One more match.
1989 was such an interesting... We were at a very interesting point in wrestling history. You had organization like the NWA that was trying to figure out what the hell was going on with WWF taking over all these territories and truly becoming the first national territory. And so WCW as an organization was founded by Ted Turner in 1988 after Turner purchased and rebranded Jim Crockett Promotions.
Right. So this match that we're talking about is only 7 months after that.
That's right. So Turner bought JCP and renamed it World Championship Wrestling after the popular NWA Georgia Championship Wrestling TV show by the same name. That was actually on Turner's network, and it was super popular. So he was like, look, people already identify this with Turner. We're just going to call JCP World Championship Wrestling. And so in 88, the actual NWA WCW, the WCW as we know WCW, was born. And with the backing of Turner's money, it grew and grew and grew. And it was truly a rival for WWF, obviously. WCW became the main NWA territory. And so it had the old NWA big gold belt and that already had national recognition at this time. And a lot of people would say it's the most prestigious world heavyweight championship in the history of pro wrestling. So that championship was defended on WCW from 88 until 93 when WCW kind of went and did their own thing away from the NWA. This series of 3 matches, guys, it had to be what they went to. So at this moment in time, they were technically a new organization. So they were looking at what can we do to really build this brand and show people what WCW is going to be all about. And they could not have picked a better pair to lay the foundation.
Well, I don't think so.
Right. And I think what's really, really interesting is think about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and where he was leading up to 1989, right? Because we are only a year removed from Savage Steamboat at WrestleMania 3
Yes.
in 88. But after WrestleMania 4 in 88, I'm sorry, so Savage was in 87 at WrestleMania 3, but after WrestleMania 4 in 88, Steamboat drops the Intercontinental title to the Honky Tonk Man, and it rubs him the wrong way. And that's what causes him to take a break and leave the WWF, which ends up getting him back to WCW, which is where this series takes place.
Well, okay, so Steamboat debuted in AWA in 76. He was hopping around promotions, earning a name for himself. And his name is Ricky. Do you know why his name is Ricky Steamboat?
I'm listening.
There was actually a Hawaiian wrestler by the name of Sammy Steamboat, and he highly resembled him. And so I can't remember who it was, gave him the name, Ricky Steamboat. And so after the name change came, and part of it was he was going by his real name, which is Rick Blood. And he was a babyface. And so people were just like, Rick Blood really sounds like a heel name.
Yeah, that's not a babyface name.
So he went by Ricky Steamboat because he looked like this Hawaiian guy. And so prior to this feud, Steamboat did have the phenomenal match at WrestleMania 3 with Randy Savage. And he was quickly becoming one of the most popular guys in WWF. Shortly after that, he asked for some time off. His wife is going to have a baby. And so whenever he came back after the time off, he realized they didn't appreciate that.
No.
Because he immediately got buried. See, at the time, Vince was seeing Steamboat as the next big guy. They were building him to be like the next Hogan, essentially.
He could have pulled it off, too.
And because he asked for this impromptu time off, they just buried him.
Yeah, when he came back, they made him a complete joke. Originally, the moniker The Dragon was a dig at him. They made him come out and breathe fire with the big wings, and they just made fun of him.
So he did compete in WrestleMania 4 in the tournament for the vacant WWF title. And he lost in the first round. So, not long after that, he jumped ship to NWA WCW. He actually jumped in as the surprise tag team partner for Hot Stuff, Eddie Gilbert, against the then NWA World Champion, Ric Flair, and Barry Windham in a tag team match where Steamboat actually pinned Flair. So setting up this series of 3 that we were talking about.
It's so good. This is one of those things where you have to view this almost in a historical concept, in like a historical frame of mind, because of the impact that it had, because it's between 2 of the greatest wrestlers to ever do it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so once we get to ranking this at the end, I think it's going to be very divisive, and I think it's going to be very, very interesting how things go. And how the listeners feel about it, because I think this is one of those matches. If we would have done any of them in this series, you're going to have a set of our listeners that want this to be number 1, and there's going to be a set of listeners that want this to be number 13. So it's
That's a good point.
It really does depend on how you look at it. But once WrestleWar 89 comes around in Nashville, the hype is unreal.
Oh yeah, I mean these two were getting like glass shattering pops just from like their entrances alone, which were, don't get me wrong, the entrances are amazing. First up, we get Flair coming out in that just beautiful turquoise blue robe with 44 models
Right.
that line the aisle and then surround the ring as he derobes. That was awesome.
Well, you get this, right? You get this storytelling right here from the start where Flair is coming out. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's a ladies' man. He's got all the money, styling and profiling. And then you have Ricky Steamboat, who is he comes out with his kid and his wife, and he's being sold as this family man, rags to riches. This is the guy that you can relate to.
You forgot to mention the rhinestone pony.
Oh, yeah, he does have a rhinestone pony.
Oh, it's very 1989.
It's amazing.
But I want to reference WWE.com did a wonderful interview between Steamboat and Flair in 2014. It was published at September 23rd, 2014. It was kind of commemorating the 25-year anniversary of this 3-match series. And Flair talked about the entrances. He talked about how it was such a sort of opposite thing where Flair was this ladies' man and Steamboat was the family man. And he actually didn't like that Steamboat used that Steamboat came out with his kid and with his wife. And I'm just going to read just a quote that he had here. He says, "It was hard because the fans were starting to like me, even though I was the bad guy. Ricky's wife, Bonnie, insisted on coming to the ring with him. It was a nightmare. He needed to be by himself. He didn't need a woman that wanted to be Miss Elizabeth. That was never going to be Miss Elizabeth. I never got along with Bonnie, and she doesn't like me. She just disrupted his career and thought she was Miss Elizabeth when she wasn't. And if you're an 18-year-old kid watching that, who do you want to be? Hell yeah, you want to be Ric Flair. 16-year-old kid or a 40-year-old dad wants to be Ric Flair. It was such a hard sell. I kept saying to Steamboat, leave him at home. I didn't mean it personally, but it was what it was."
Wow.
Yeah.
What you funny is after you said that, like, yeah, that did kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit, because like Rick doesn't really wrestle heel in this match at all. Like he's getting cheered for most of it.
Well, he does a little bit. You know, he definitely has some almost vintage Ric Flair tactics that he uses, but you can definitely tell that this crowd is not 100% Steamboat and 100% against Flair at any point.
Well, I gotta say, you're in Nashville in 1989. If you come out with 40 models, you are gonna get cheered.
Right, so just picture it. Let's set the stage one more time for you before we really dig into this match. It's May 7th, 1989, from the Nashville Municipal Auditorium from Nashville, Tennessee, for WCW or NWA WrestleWar, whatever you want to call it. It's right either way. Music City Showdown. You've got JR on commentary, which is awesome, with another guy who is as respected in the business as anyone else, and that's Bob Caudle, who's wonderful. And the referee for this match is the 5-time NWA Referee of the Year, Tommy Young, of course.
Who actually refereed all 3 matches in this series, which I think is fascinating.
And if you've never seen Tommy Young referee a match, just go watch this match and just watch Tommy's facial expressions the whole time.
Right. He is, think he looks physically like Earl Hebner, but he reacts like Charles Robinson.
Oh, he does.
That is what Tommy Young is, and that's what I really appreciate about
I'm
it.
led to believe that Baby Nate got his mannerisms from watching watching Tommy Young.
He had to.
Every time there's a chop, every time there's an arm drag, he jumps.
Yeah.
in excitement. It's awesome.
This is a match. This is a night really that is so interesting. You know, if you just look at the match card, there's just all sorts of guys on this card, right? And it's packed full of future Hall of Famers and just guys that were really starting to be in their prime at this point in 1989. But we also, like we listened and played for you at the jump, the "to be the man you have to beat the man" promo is in this night, just an hour or so before the match between Flair and Steamboat. And Steamboat has a reaction promo just a little bit later in the night, right before he comes out. And both of these guys in that promo are basically saying, you know what? The guy that I'm standing across the ring from, he is the best. But that's just going to prove how good I am when I beat him.
Yeah, I love that because they don't bury each other, which is what you see a lot of. Like they're like, oh no, like he deserves to be in the ring across from me. It's like, okay, like it's weird because I think we're so used to 50-50 booking these days that we're used to seeing people just completely make their opponent out to be nothing. And when both the men are saying, "Oh no, this is the greatest wrestler alive today," and when I beat him, I'll be the greatest wrestler alive today.
Well, one of the things it does for me is it really adds to the realism of the sport.
Yeah. I agree.
WCW and classic wrestling in general felt so real. It's not these over-the-top characters that are going out there and cutting these ridiculous promos about, taking you out to the desert and putting you down. No, it's about this guy's great, I'm great, we're going to go out there and see who the better man is. And that was so interesting to me.
And the crowd eats it up.
Well, it was a totally different time. I mean, we talk about all the time how today wrestling is so different because it can't be presented as real, at least in terms of like actual competition. Like it can't be because it's 2019 and that door is wide open and everyone knows what's happening. I mean, the internet ruined kayfabe, so to speak, right?
That too, and you can't have a match like this on the same card as, say, a match between The Undertaker, who's supposed to be an undead necromancer,
right,
and be taken seriously. Or as much as I love him, like The Fiend, like you can't have characters like that and go, this is a real sport and we're going to treat it like so. You just can't do it. But I love that, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword.
But you want to talk about things that add a legitimacy. They do something in this match in particular that really adds to it. And they have 3 judges. They have 3 judges that are sitting around the ring that are planning to come up with the decision in case the match goes to the 60-minute time limit, or if the match ends in some sort of controversy, whether it be a count out or disqualification, things like that, to where the judges are going to decide the winner. And if you want to look for validity and legitimacy, look no further than the 3 judges that they selected.
I'm so happy you mentioned that. So each one of them gets like their sort of introduction by the ring announcer, and first he mentions emerging from St. Louis, at the time had the most NWA titles in history, which was Lou Thez. He was a 6-time champion.
Lou Thez, I mean, when you think about wrestling, he's one of the first names that comes to mind. An absolute pioneer, a legend in the business, and he's going to be judging this World Heavyweight Championship match. Sign me up.
But the thing that's fascinating is that if he wins, Flair, he would tie Lou Thez for 6 titles. Now, we know that Flair did go on to win 16 times, which is fascinating in its own right, but at 89, to think that 6 times was a lot. But to be fair, though, back in those days, in Lou Thesz's day, we talk about Bruno Sammartino, or we talk about Bob Backlund, or even Hulk Hogan, who held their belts for like 4 or 5 years straight, that was crazy. I believe they said that if you take Bruno Sammartino's record, he had multiple wins, but just his cumulative days as champion is nearly 8 years. That Lou Thez had a similar situation where I think the longest he held the belt was for maybe 2 years at a time, but he also had a 5 or 6 year cumulative amount of days as champion. Also, back in those days, in the 40s and 50s, they only competed once a month.
Right. And I mean, that reminds me of CM Punk's promo when he's talking about this is the big 30-minute promo with The Rock, where he says that, if I would have been champion in Sammartino's era, I would have been champion for 10 years because, and the line that he says is Sammartino never wrestled TLC matches against Ryback on free television.
Which at that time was a dig at Ryback for dropping him on the concrete and missing the table.
Ooh.
Right. But it's a very different era. But all that to say is that Lou Thez and Legend are synonyms. They're one and the same.
Oh, yeah.
But then you also have the only world champion to ever come out of New Zealand in Pat O'Connor.
Pat O'Connor he's one of those, you hear the name, and, oh, I know who that is, but it's one of those things, somebody, who's Pat O'Connor? Said, well, he's the only New Zealand-born champion. He invented the O'Connor roll. Pat O'Connor is one of those classic grapplers. He's one of the guys who would have been alongside guys like Gene LaBelle, who, yes, they were pro wrestlers, but they were also just total badasses in real life. This is a guy that would have pioneered what we call MMA today. He's one of these original grapplers from back in his time, and he's just one of those legitimate badasses from the sport. But I think he only won the title once or twice. I might be wrong. I'm happily to be corrected. I will give you a shout out on Twitter if you correct me.
I'll hold you to it.
And then we get the legendary Terry Funk, who, as we find out at the end of the match, had just gotten done shooting a movie with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
And Rick is like, you ain't in my league, champ. You've been out there rubbing shoulders with Hollywood. I'm like, I want to point out that the movie he filmed was not a Hollywood production. It was a Canon Films production. But that's not important.
So this is actually the second Ric Flair match, you could say, to end up on our list of 100.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is.
And Ric Flair's name is synonymous with legendary wrestling matches and legendary wrestling personalities. So you have this, maybe, you could argue that it's one of the biggest world championship matches in his career to this point. And at ringside, you have these absolute phenomenal legends from wrestling past.
Well, Luthez says they do an interview with the three judges midway through the night at WrestleWar, and Luthez says this is the most important match of the century.
That's a big deal coming from Luthez.
Come on.
Well, so do you know where Ric Flair cut his teeth? You know who trained Ric Flair?
If I remember correctly, Ric Flair was trained by, I'm drawing a blank, but I want to
Booker
say
T. No?
No, he went to Greg Gagne's training camp.
Vern
There it
Gagne.
is.
Vern Gagne,
Mm-hmm.
and he quit the first day and had to be convinced to come back.
So his career began when he attended Vern Gagne's training camp. That's exactly right. The training camp was inside of Gagne's barn in Minneapolis
That sounds hot.
in the winter.
Oh no, it was freezing.
That sounds cold.
So this is 1971 Minneapolis, Minnesota in the winter in the outdoors in a barn.
And the very first thing they had to do is run like 10 miles.
No wonder Flair is the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to run 10 miles and then do like 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 200 sumo squats. Then they start stretching to train.
Well, and then in 1975, Flair's in a plane accident.
And he's told he's never going to walk again, let alone wrestle.
Right? And I mean, can you imagine having to go through all of that and doing those long that 1 year long training in a barn in the backyard, and then I'm just now making it into this career. It's like, what if that plane crash had ended Ric Flair's career?
Be a travesty.
What would wrestling look like right now?
I don't think WCW would have been as big a contender as it was for as long as it was without Ric Flair.
We would not have had the Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat match that we got right here
Yep.
to set the stage for what WCW would become.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, they talk, if you ever go back and watch Ric Flair's documentary from about, I think, 11 years ago now, it was in 2008, it's right after he retired, he talks about how him and Steamboat had over 2,000 matches. And I think it definitely shows because they just have this. You're not going to catch them calling a single spot in this match.
No, not even a little bit.
They don't. They are like looking up. I think they intentionally, when they do, there's quite a few rest holds in this match. It's an older match. It's slower pace. But every time you can see both men's face. They're not hiding their faces. They are like shaking the hair out like, no, look at me. I'm just taking a, or Flair is like picking fights with people in the front row for heckling him.
Oh, it's good.
You will never catch them calling a spot. It's great.
Do y'all think Ricky Steamboat's son, Richie Steamboat, wearing Honky Tonk Man's gear was a dig at Honky?
Oh, not at all. I'm sure that he held no ill regard towards Honky or the Fed for burying him.
Not at all.
Not
It's
at
fine.
all.
None at all.
Although it is pretty funny, especially since JR says, and look at the rhinestone cowboy there.
Yeah.
Looks like the king of rock and roll himself, and we're in Nashville. I'm like, that's a burial.
Not so subtle. Not so subtle.
And then, of course, like maybe 2 or 3 months later, the Honky Tonk Man gets jobbed out in 30 seconds by the Ultimate Warrior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to put one more touch on the judges, because as much as it adds legitimacy to this match, I think it changes how this match is going to look. Because Terry Funk says it in the interview midway through the show. He says the time limit and the judges is going to make an offensive match out of this.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Definitely.
now, not only do they have to try to beat each other, But in case it does go that full time limit and there is a draw, they have to make sure they've impressed the judges enough to get that decision.
Like, it gives them a kayfabe reason to have a faster match and to be only offensive instead of these. In 89, I mean, this is like a slow match by today's standards, but in 89, this was like, holy shit, they're really like, they dive over the top rope. That didn't happen in the 80s. That was rare.
And really, even, I mean, when I was watching it, it still seems pretty quick by today's standards. I mean, there are a lot of, and we'll get into the wrestles and things like that, and the arm bars and the hammer locks and things. But for the most part, like, these guys were moving.
Yes, and Flair said it a million times. Like, Steamboat like pushed him because he knew that Steamboat could have a high, fast-paced match for 60 minutes. He knew he could do it. They did it in New Orleans. And the only reason I didn't do it here is because the match was like half the length of that one.
So the 60-minute match in New Orleans, apparently they knew the finish, and the other 55 minutes of that match completely called on the spot.
Yeah. And once again, you're never going to catch them doing it. These are like masters of like how to like mask what they're doing.
This is again a time though that speaks to the style of wrestling that it was, because it, especially with guys that were this high of a level of competitors and this good, as good as these guys were, it was a lot easier to feel out who you were wrestling and feel out your opponent and be able to almost seamlessly go from spot to spot because of that.
They basically do that. Like, the opening 10 seconds is kind of that feel out, but as soon as they lock up, like, they're immediately going for spot. They're not doing like the long... Like, they lock up and then immediately there's a break, or they lock up again and there's an arm drag immediately.
Yeah, there's not this long, drawn-out lockup where you have this test of strength and then it lasts a few minutes. Like, they really go for it.
They go for it.
Well, it can't... another point, like 2019, it doesn't... Like, the style that is wrestled now doesn't lend itself to that sort of seamless...
No, it doesn't.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And, yes, are there wrestlers that call out spots worse than others? Yes. I mean, we talk about that all the time. We see it all the time. But with the type of offense that has to be done now to keep the audience's attention, it would be a lot harder to just go with the flow.
And I also got to point out, I thought about telling you guys this before we turned the mics on, but man, it must have been a lot easier to be a wrestler in 89 because the fans don't have smartphones to pull out. Mm-hmm. So they're either watching the match or they don't really have much of a choice. Sure, they can go to the bathroom and get concessions, but there's nothing to distract them. There's only the match.
No, they paid a ticket to see Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. They're going to fucking watch Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. What else are they going to do? Put their hands in their pockets? That's it.
Pretty much, yeah. They didn't pay their tickets to live tweet it on Twitter or heckle. They paid their tickets to watch the show.
And these guys look at the top of their careers.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
They are in their prime.
The best form of both of these guys that you can get.
Like, when you say Ric Flair, I think of this Ric Flair. I think long blonde hair, like really, really trim, actually like looks like he works out and not just sad. And then like blue tights. And when you say Ricky Steamboat, I think long hair, I think red headband, I think the white trunks with the red boots. That's how I think of.
And you get it all. Everything that you think of when you think Ric Flair, you get in this match. Mm-hmm. You get the Flair flop. You get the over the top rope clothesline. You get the figure four leg lock. You get the woos. You get the chops. You get it all.
Oh, we get the chops all right,
and we get them early. We talk about how it's a really nice pace early, and we get arm drags from the Dragon early, and that's something that will repeat itself throughout this match, and that's because JR says it. No one throws an arm drag like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Yeah, and he says it like that's what brings you to the dance. You're gonna go to it, and it works.
And they're the best in the business,
right? And part of what Flair and Steamboat talked about leading into this match is Flair was a guy that really liked to work the headlock. Like, that was what he really liked doing. He was really good at it, but he felt that Steamboat and himself wore out the headlock in Chicago and in New Orleans. Yeah, so they needed something else to do. And Flair hates the arm drag. Like, he hates taking the arm drag, but that's how much he appreciated working with Steamboat and how much he respected him, because for this third match, he said, yeah, we're going to do the arm drag.
So Steamboat does work the arm the whole match.
Yeah, he does, which actually kind of surprised me. But like I said before, I didn't watch the New Orleans match. I didn't realize that ended on like a chicken wing that got turned into a pin. I didn't know that.
Exactly. So the chicken wing was such a huge part of the last match that Steamboat working the arm is a carryover and continuation of this long form storytelling that they had going on.
How much do you love that?
Yeah.
It's just so impressive. You don't see that anymore.
And you hear Bob Caudle say that Steamboat is the only man to ever make Flair submit, and it was from that double chicken wing. Paul, we were watching it together, and you said, "I don't understand why he's working on the arm." Because his finishing move is that crossbody.
Yeah, it is the beautiful flying crossbody from the top rope. Like, why would you not want to do that?
Right, but Landon just said it. It's because they're telling that story. They're continuing the story for New Orleans, which is just so good. You think they could do that more now because it's so easy to access everything.
I know.
And you do get, I would say, maybe about 50 or 70 arm drags in this match.
Not as many chops.
But it's arm drags, it's hammer locks, a Kimura lock, all trying to soften Flair up. But you also get a jackknife hammer lock.
Which I have never seen before or since. And this match is 30 years old.
Right? It was gorgeous. Ricky Steamboat at his best.
Well, talking about that strategy about really working on the arms and the shoulders to try to loosen Flair up for the chicken wing, JR says if it worked in New Orleans, it's going to work in Nashville.
And you better believe every time he does one of the mini arm drags, he turns it right into an arm bar, or he's got what I like about it is if this was a WWF match, every time he locks in the arm bar, they would just sit there for 2 minutes because they got 30 minutes to fill. He doesn't. Like, he's constantly doing something. He's changing up the hold. He's moving around. He keeps it interesting so you don't just go, all right, wake me up in 10 seconds when he breaks his hold, because they just keep transitioning. And it's actually a very effective way to catch your breath from doing this high pace, but not stop moving. It's what we saw when it's the same thing we saw with Eddie and Ray.
Yeah.
It keeps doing something.
Where everything had a purpose.
Exactly. He's trying to roll it. So he's trying to roll him over into a full arm bar, but no, Rick pulls the hair, or Rick has the ropes, or Rick is trying to roll out and then they go into the hammerlock, and then Rick's trying to roll out the hammerlock. So that's whenever Ricky does the jackknife.
Right, or it's turning these minor submissions, these wrist locks, these hammer locks, these arm bars into pinning predicaments.
Exactly.
And so it's making you keep an eye on it the whole time. There's no, oh, they're resting, I'm going to look away now. You don't know what's going to happen next, even though it's something that you may have seen several times already in the match, because it looks different every time you see it.
And I just love that we're barely 5 minutes into this match before we just get this amazing chop fest with them, because Ric Flair loves to work the corner and do the chop, and then Steamboat fires back with his own chops, and then we get this top rope flying chop, and then we get the first Flair flop, and I just remember he does it, and then they go back into the corner, and then he takes 2 more chops, and then just walks away, and then does the flop.
Well, there are two things that I remember about this first part of the match. One of them is that Flair, he is the Flair flop. It's pretty ridiculous, right? But when Flair's doing these ridiculous chops and Steamboat throws them right back.
Oh yeah,
right. JR says you can hear the flesh smacking. This is indeed the NWA. But what's really interesting to me, and this is another little tidbit from the WWE.com article that I read, is Steamboat thinks that he kind of gave Flair the chop. Like that was Steamboat's move. So Steamboat says, he'd bring it and I'd bring it. Sometimes we'd chop each other so many times in the chest that our skin was splitting and our chests were bleeding. He's got a great chop, but he only started chopping after he hooked up with me. I never asked him about it, but that's my memory. And Flair's response is, no. I was throwing chops. I started that long before I met him. Nobody's got a chop like mine. I got the woo. You tell me.
Isn't that like Ric Flair, though? I mean, okay, so considering what we're going through right now with Ric Flair.
Case in point.
At this point in time, whenever you're listening to this, I don't know. But this week, Ric Flair is suing the WWE for the use of the term "the man." And so he went out and, he apparently he tried to be civil at first, and he was just like, hey, guys, that's my thing, right? You didn't really ask me. And then they didn't say anything. So he went and tried to copyright "the man" as a trademark it. And now there's this whole big fight going on.
This is a little bit off topic, but it is definitely Flair, or, it's revolved around Flair. But do we just quickly, what do you think about that?
I think it's being kind of petty.
Yeah.
You are 70.
Let it go.
Like, you're not going to be the man for much longer, dude. Come
And
on.
also, Becky's been using that moniker for like over a year now.
Right.
And now you're like, oh, wait a second.
And also, it's been so wildly successful for her. Why would you want to take that away?
Yeah.
It just...
Maybe
anyway.
I definitely get the whole, this is what made him, this is what's identifiable as Ric Flair. Let's pay respect to that. I get that maybe if there wasn't like some sort of point where they reached out to him and asked if it was okay. Mm-hmm. I get that might have been appreciated, but I don't think it's worth all of this fuss, because the fact is it came from a feud against Charlotte, who is a Flair.
Yeah.
And so the way that it was just a very natural evolution, and it has done such great things for this young woman's career. Why would you want to take that away from her?
It's, not a fan. Not a fan. But let's go back now 30 years. We are back in 1989, well before the man. And we're at a point in the match where Flair keeps trying to grab the momentum really for the first time. But every time he starts to get a little bit of advantage, the Dragon goes right back to an arm drag and right back to an arm bar or a hammerlock.
Oh, yeah. And then we got to a point where after we see that amazing jackknife hammerlock, I remember I even said this to you when we were watching it. Said, well, Steamboat goes for a top rope nothing.
Yeah, so I like that, though. I like that they set up, it's a part of the storytelling of the match. Early on, they set up that Ricky's not afraid to fly. Mm-hmm. And so he goes up there and you're like, oh shit.
Then like Flair immediately is like, nope. And then he goes to the side of the mat, and then Steamboat's like, all right, fine. And then he does this beautiful missile drop kick, which sends Ric Flair over the top rope. And I remember I said, you don't see that in 1989.
Right. And I mean, the Dragon, who when he came back at WrestleMania 25 looked as good as as ever, right? But when I saw that drop kick, I just thought, this is why he's so good. I loved it so much. He hits that beautiful drop kick on Flair. Flair goes out of the ring, and then when he gets back into the ring, this is when things start to change just a touch.
I love it because he reverses an arm drag, and Ric Flair does an arm drag of his own.
Yeah, and
it's
the
like,
crowd
hey.
goes wild for it, right? Because the Dragon had hit so many arm drags on Flair already, and for Flair to turn it back around, boos start coming.
And the way that he turns it back around is so interesting to me. So Flair is in the arm, he's in like an arm lock or a wrist lock or something, and so Flair uses Ricky's own weight. So he's trapped in a hold, but he pushes Ricky Steamboat against the ropes to get that leverage for an Irish whip, and that's when he does the arm drag. It's like, so simple.
Oh, yeah.
So
but
smart, though.
It's just genius.
Yeah. And what I love is, like you said, like Steamboat starts getting some booze, and then Rick just, I guess, instinct, he just goes for like an eye rake.
Yep.
Poke to the eye.
There it is.
And then they start
long
working.
enough.
Yeah. And I'm like, then he goes to whip Steamboat into the corner. Steamboat kind of fires back with some chops. And then we get it's a 10 punch, but you pointed it out to me. Every time he hits it, it's an open palm strike. And like that's his thing, though. He did that. That was, everybody did like you're not supposed to use a closed fist, but for a 10 punch spot, they just did a closed fist anyway, which kind of shatters kayfabe. But he does the chop strike, which would not bruise you up. It would just.
I mean, Ricky, for the vast majority of his career, was a babyface.
Yes.
And there's just no way he was going to get over any other way.
No, he's like that rare breed of wrestler that is just better as a babyface. He
really
never
was.
turned heel.
And it worked the whole time. Part of, you think of guys that were baby faces their entire career. You first of all can't think of many.
Ricky Steamboat.
Right. The difference between a Ricky Steamboat career-long babyface and a John Cena career-long babyface is that people really wanted John Cena to turn for a long time. Ricky Steamboat, people loved him
Never
as he
did.
was. And that's really, really interesting and really fun, but that speaks to how different Steamboat and Flair were.
Yeah, but you think career-long babyface. I think Ricky Steamboat. I think Ricky Morton, and I think Sting. Because guys that were successful and never turned, they were always a good guy, and they're just better. They were just like they peaked as a white meat babyface.
So 15 minutes in, we go to the judges' scorecards, and at this point, we're about halfway through the match.
But at this point, they think they could only be a quarter of the way through,
That's
which is
correct.
important to know.
That's correct, because the match did have a
It's a
60
60-minute time limit.
60-minute time
Yeah.
limit. So 15 minutes in, the judges score the match unanimously for Steamboat.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting. I mean, I totally agree if I was scoring too. Steamboat has been in vast control of the majority of the match with these arm drags and these arm locks, the hammer locks. I find it interesting, this dynamic of having the judges, and you get every 15 minutes, you get an update on how the scorecards are doing. It adds to the realism for me. I would love to see this come back.
Oh yeah, I do too. Well, they're supposedly going to be doing this with SmackDown when it moves over to Fox. So fingers crossed.
I love that.
Really?
They talked about returning it to not necessarily like a round system, but they're not going to stop. It's just going to be, you'll have 1 to 3 judges that will have their scorecards. I think we're going to see a lot more. This match has a 15-minute time limit, and they'll just go to the time limit. And
That's
just,
really interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually very interested.
Not
to see
sure how that would work in 2019, but very
I think
interested
it
by
can work if they do it the right way. It can work.
Yeah.
But what I love that you mentioned that, but not before we get our very first pin attempt, which is right before we get the judges' card scores off of a beautiful back suplex, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just oof. But we get this. This one thing that I really, really, really love is they're both going for shoulder blocks, but Steamboat somehow turns a shoulder block attempt into a snapmare, which is like, I've never seen somebody do that before either.
It's really quick.
It's very, very quick. It just looked like he just did it. But no. Rick had come off the ropes and was going for a tackle and just snapmare. I'm like, oh, God. And then, oh, God, Steamboat goes for like the flying shoulder block, and Ric Flair just jucks, and Steamboat hits the top rope and then sails over. It looks so sore.
It does. This is actually a really interesting part, because this is when the match does change momentum.
Oh, yes.
Because while Steamboat's outside of the ring, he actually gets tossed into the first row of the crowd, and Flair leans Steamboat against the railing, back, like with his back against the railing, like leaning him back towards the ring, and he hits this really gross elbow, like right on the throat.
And
of Steamboat.
When we briefly mentioned Steamboat's feud with Randy Savage just over a year earlier, 2 years earlier, that started because Randy Savage hit him in the throat with a ring bell. Mm-hmm. And like he got kayfabe, couldn't speak, and had to go have like surgery to have like blood drained from his trachea. So like here we are 2 years later, and they're actually incorporating that, because Rick drops like 2 or 3 different elbows throughout this match right onto the throat. And it's like, okay, this is like some serious. We know you've seen both these men's careers like in and out of this company, so we're going to incorporate. And I love that, because there's no reason why you can't like mention an angle from another company if it makes the match better, or is like from a psychology standpoint. I love that.
Oh, I completely agree. You know, the more ways you can incorporate moves into telling the story, I mean, that's how we get some of our favorite wrestlers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's how we get some of our favorite rivalries, because of how deeply connected every moment is to that rivalry. But this is actually a really fun part for me, because the Dragon, when he goes back into the ring, he's kind of chasing Flair back in. And in his efforts to chase Flair, he runs up onto the apron and does a springboard chop off the top rope. It doesn't look like it. It looks like he's just trying to get in, and he's running after him. And so the quickest way to do that is to run on the top rope.
And it's great.
But it's kind of very real looking. But the reality is it is a springboard chop. And so for 1989, super impressed. Like, I was super excited by the whole thing.
And then I just, at this point, though, that pace, we talked about it, it's pretty quick for the time. And even by today's standards, it's relatively quick, because they don't slow down often. They do a lot of holds, but they really don't slow down. They're constantly off the ropes. They're running. And then we get this like beautiful back suplex. And then Ric Flair.
I mean, one of the best back suplexes.
It's so
just
beautiful.
Super high angle, like has Steamboat in a perfect position. Flair drops him right like in the perfect spot.
Oh, yeah.
It seems silly, like kind of dissecting and going into how deep this beautiful back suplex was, but it was one of those moments where I was sitting and watching and going, damn, these guys are good.
Oh, yeah. And then for the first time in this match, Ric Flair, out of the corner, does that beautiful knee drop. And
man.
And every time he just does a forward roll, and even though it doesn't make any sense, he should roll because of the momentum. Like, no, that's not how that works.
It's just one of those things where you see Flair do the high angle knee drop, and then you're like, I see Triple H doing it. I see Randy Orton doing it. It's just laying the foundation for so many others who came behind him. And, not just that one move, but this whole style that Ric Flair wrestles as the master heel who's going to be controlling this match. And it's almost like that move in particular is almost like I'm going to kick you while you're down move. It's just so good.
And then, not to get away from suplexes, we get, and I had to mention this. I never thought I would see this in a 1989 match, but we get this gorgeous butterfly suplex.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, okay. They're after my heart a year before I was born.
Speaking of the knee drop, right, and being in control of the match and that being sort of a heel move, we noticed this, and Landon, I know you got really excited about this part. After Flair hits a stun gun on Steamboat is lying on his back very, very close to the ropes, and Flair hits this knee drop on Steamboat, and then he's like kneeling, Flair is, but he's talking to the referee. He's talking to Tommy Young. And while he's talking to him, his knee is still over the throat of Steamboat. And it's just...
Tommy Young is distracted. He has no idea what's going on. And you see Steamboat just squirming over there.
Right. Flair just looks like he's just chit-chatting.
But you know who does see that? The crowd.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
Because they get fired up like, you just hear this pop in the crowd. And then Ric Flair's like, oh, what are you talking about? No. On the ropes.
May be my favorite heel spot of all time.
It was so good. Because by the time he got up, it was almost like, oh, I didn't even realize I was on his throat. Oops.
It's something that I definitely emulated in my days as a wrestler, but I don't think that spot works anymore because fans don't care. They want to see something like flashy, and that's not flashy enough.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're about 25 minutes into the match.
We're getting there.
And the judges' scorecard has a split decision right now in favor of Flair.
Yeah, I thought that was crazy because they mentioned that initially it was unanimous, all three men for Steamboat because he just controlled this match. But all of a sudden, Flair is just firing up, and he's just taking control, and he keeps going for these multiple pin attempts. He knows he's not going to get them, but a pin attempt is going to boost your points. Mm-hmm. So it's like, oh, man, this is really, really smart. So they point out how it went from 3 straight for Steamboat to 2-1 for Flair. I'm like, that's a big deal.
When we think about the high power offense in this match, you really think about the chops, and you think about for Steamboat, you think about the chops and the 10 punches in the corner and the arm drags. But for Flair, you really think about the suplexes, because next we get a suplex out on the floor.
Yes.
Out on the floor. And it's as hard as any suplex you'll see out on the floor, right?
What I love about it, though, is when he does the suplex, and then Jim Ross goes, there's nothing between them and the ground except for imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a very Jim Ross line that we get.
I love Jim Ross
repeatedly
so much.
throughout the years.
This is young, pre-Bell's palsy Jim Ross, and he's just so much quicker, and his voice is so much more high-pitched, and I really wish that he didn't have all the health problems he did, because, man, can you imagine if we still had that Jim Ross today?
But just a quick about Jim Ross, like, how do you not respect that guy? Like, perseverance as anybody ever, right? And to be as iconic as he was, even after all that stuff happened, love that, and seeing him in 1989 is really a lot of fun, and watching him in this match and listening to him commentate. But suplex by Flair onto Steamboat out on the floor, and then Steamboat hits a crossbody that throws them back out of the ring at the same time again.
Ooh, they both sail over that top rope when he hits him. Like, oh God, what year is this?
Exactly. It's a little bit surprising at times,
yeah.
But it very much feels like we've got to get this offense in because we're getting judged, and also it's the third match in this trilogy, so we're bringing everything we have.
Yeah, I'm really convinced that because the last 2 matches were both around the hour mark. I really think originally this match was supposed to be an hour long, and they planned everything, and they said, we're still going to do it all, but we're going to condense it down.
So the Chi-Town Rumble was actually 22 minutes. 23 minutes,
okay.
The Chi-Town Rumble, the first one in this match. But it was the one where Steamboat beat Flair.
Exactly.
Right, it was the one where Steamboat beat Flair, and he won the title. And so the second match in New Orleans, going that 55 minutes, was an even bigger deal to Steamboat because he proved that he could hang, right? Like, not only, like, my win wasn't a fluke, because, look, I just hung around for an hour and I still won.
Exactly.
I won a 2 out of 3 falls match. And so this match, it looks differently. Everyone expected it to go the time limit, especially coming off the heels of their second match.
Well, to be honest,
that's why they had the judges.
Exactly.
I really feel like them making such a big deal about the judges had the entire crowd convinced that this is going to be 60-minute draw, 60-minute draw, and then we're going to find out who won on points. And the fact that they didn't do that, I think, is another reason why this match is so revered. Because if I watch all three of them in sequence, I'm like, oh, well, they're surely going to go to that draw because you keep making such a big deal about it. And just they don't do that. But one thing I do love is, like, after they are both sail over that top rope from that crossbody, and there's a little bit of back and forth on the outside, nothing like earlier when we get the elbows across the throat. When they come back in, Ric Flair goes to the top rope, and I'm thinking, okay,
Seen this before.
you won your first title by coming off that top rope and reversing a suplex, but you've never, ever, ever, ever hit anything off the top rope since. I love you, Rick, but please come down.
And he doesn't until WrestleMania 24, 23, whenever he retires. What is it, 24?
24,
24,
yes,
yeah.
But he does come down after Steamboat throws him off the top.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, damn it, Rick, you knew that wasn't going to work. And then we get another 10 punch, but this time it actually is 10 punches and not 10 palm strikes. I guess that if you want to look into the subtlety of the match, is Steamboat getting frustrated because he's trying to regain control of the match. And we get a beautiful superplex.
And a huge sell from Flair when his back hits the mat. I mean, you can just see the agony on his face. My back, my back.
And the crowd is getting frantic.
Oh, the crowd is hot.
Yeah, because we're around that 30-minute mark, and things are really picking up. And that superplex is like a sign of,
Here we
like
go.
maybe this won't go the
Here
whole
we
hour.
go. And then, like, before while Rick is still writhing around in pain, the chicken wing gets locked
For
in
the first time.
And we're like, oh, here we go. It's how he beat him in New Orleans. Here we go. And then, like, Flair, like, he tries to break it. He almost gets out of it a couple of times, but he gets that bottom rope. All right, you got to let him go.
And it was pretty quick. Like, he hit those ropes within really 30 to 40 seconds of being into
Yes.
the chicken wing. And so Steamboat never really had a chance to really cinch it in.
No, he did not.
And so Flair is seen as like, oh, look at, he escaped. Like, how crafty was that?
And then Flair starts getting some more desperate offense. He's not trying to do chops and suplexes. He's just trying to do whatever he can to get that belt back and beat him. That's when we start really seeing the heel side of Flair come out.
Yes.
We start getting the eye pokes. We start getting those kicks are a little low. Not quite low blow, but those are some lower kicks we're getting from Flair. And then we get this. Steamboat goes up, does another top rope chop. He goes for a second one, and then Flair, bumps into those ropes, and Steamboat conveniently lands on the top rope, groin first, and then rolls to the outside.
Most
And-
notably, hurting his knee in the process.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. And that is a huge part of the story.
Because as soon as he gets back in that ring, we get first off, we get a beautiful delayed vertical suplex that brings him back into that ring. And then Flair grabs that leg, and he starts jaw-jacking with the fans. He grabs the leg, and he keeps wrenching his leg. And then he spins around and drops the figure 4 leg lock in the center of the ring.
And one of the things that I love the most about this figure 4 is that it's 30 minutes into the match, and it's the first time we've seen it.
And just he locks it in. And here, like I said, center of the ring. And Steamboat can barely stand because he like messed up his leg falling over the top rope. And I just remember thinking, I know this match ends, but I'm like, fuck yeah, come on. Flair's going to win the title.
And you have JR selling the shit out of the figure 4 leg lock.
Which nobody else could do that well.
It really feels like this larger than life moment, and everybody thinks this is the end of the match.
But somehow Steamboat gets to that bottom rope. And then Rick is like teasing he's going to set it up again from a standing position. I love it because he's holding Steamboat's leg up. And Steamboat tries to hit him and can't do it. And Rick's like, woo, what are you going to do? And then we get an enziguri. And I'm like, holy shit.
It's perfect, too.
We got a fucking
It is-
enziguri in
it is
89?
perfect.
And then Steamboat's like, all right, let's do this. He does the same pose that Jimmy Snuka usually did. Drops on the one knee and does the double I love you. I'm like, here we go. He's going to go up top rope. We're going to get that crossbody. Goes for a scoop slam. Ric Flair rolls it into a pin. 1, 2, 3.
Out of nowhere, you could say.
Yeah,
seemingly.
completely. Just boom. That's also very rare for like 89. You didn't see that. You saw this is definitely the end of the match, not, he got him. And then the crowd loses their shit. And we get this big babyface reaction from Ric Flair winning the title. And I love it.
Where was this?
Nashville.
Nashville,
in
Tennessee.
Nashville,
Nashville.
Tennessee. So it's not too terribly far from the Carolinas.
Oh no.
Nope.
It really felt like a hometown match for Ric Flair.
It
The
really-
way the crowd embraced him. I mean, and not to say that they disrespected Steamboat at all.
They didn't. They did a very good job of building him.
And then the respect we get from Steamboat after the match. I mean, it's immediate. He gets up. He's like, "Look, I knew I was wrestling the best in the world. There is, no hard feelings. I'm not surprised. I'm not disappointed. He was very appreciative, and that was really cool to see.
Yeah, and they shook hands.
I love that they shake hands and he hands him the belt, and I love that because I'm so used to Ric Flair winning a match and just going, "I'm the greatest. You never had a chance, even though you kicked my ass for the first half." We didn't get that. Ric Flair, because Jim Ross is in that ring to say for the only the first person to say congratulations on 6-time champion. And Rick immediately says, "I gotta say this right now, Ricky Steamboat, you are the greatest wrestler I've ever been in the ring with. We may not be friends, but I respect you. You're an outstanding competitor." And he just immediately gives him these really, really high. That's a big deal coming from Ric Flair.
Ric Flair says Steamboat is the greatest champion I've ever faced. And coming from Ric Flair, who has had championship matches with Dusty Rhodes and Buddy Rogers and Andre the Giant, you name it, that is high praise.
Yes.
And to come immediately following a match where he was the heel, I mean, that's definitely not a heel reaction.
Oh yeah, like I said, they shake hands.
Yeah.
He gives him the belt, and then he immediately, it doesn't go, "Oh, I did." He says, "No. Steamboat, you are the greatest champion I've ever faced." That's the first words out of his mouth. Not, "Oh my God, I did it. I won the belt." No. That man right there is the greatest man I've ever fought. And then he's like, and I'm so honored to have this title. And then before he could get any words out, here comes Terry Funk.
Yeah, Terry Funk, who was just a judge of this match, right?
just-
He's just coming to congratulate Flair. It's fine. He's just coming to congratulate him.
He walks in as, "Rick, I want to be the very first person to say congratulations on being a 6-time champion. That's a fantastic achievement you've gotten there." And
Well,
it's like-
shit. Why am I not surprised that you have a good Terry Funk impression? My
Of course,
God.
immediately, both Jim Ross and Rick are like, "Well, thank you very much, Terry, but this is not your moment." "Oh no, I just want to say that was a hard fought match, and I think I'd like to be the very first person to challenge you for that title." And then Rick's like, "Oh well, that's a mighty fine." No, I can't do a Ric Flair impression, but he just immediately says, "Well, that's great, Terry, but you just spent the last year in Hollywood rubbing elbows with Sylvester Stallone, so you're not even in the top 10. "Oh, you don't think I'm a top 10 competitor? Oh, I was just joking, Rick. I'm not actually going to challenge you."
So one of the things that I do love about Ric Flair saying, like his reasoning for not accepting Terry Funk's challenge, it's not that he's like backing down from a challenge, because Ric Flair, didn't back down from a challenge. He said, "Look, you've been in Hollywood doing your thing. Over here in WCW, we have a top 10 wrestler list that decides who the next challenger is going to be. And you're not in that list, then you're not a contender."
"You don't think I'm top 10, Rick? Okay, well, I'm not actually going to challenge you. I was just joking." And then he just assaults him, and just he goes from okay to "Rah!" in a split second, and then he just viciously assaults him in the ring, throws him out of the ring, assaults him on the outside of the ring, throws him over that railing, brings him back in. And I know it's probably not the very first time in wrestling, but definitely the first time in American pro wrestling, Terry Funk pile drives Ric Flair onto a table. And of course, since it's 1989 that they don't do table spots, Rick's head bounces off the table.
Yeah, table does not break. This is not a fixed table that was meant to be this spot where he goes through. It was, ouch.
Yes, and Ric Flair's head smacks that table, and according to him in an interview, he said he damn near broke his neck. And if you go back and watch, as soon as they hit that table, they broke the legs because the table collapses, and then Terry Funk rolls backwards and almost lands on his head. So they get this fantastic moment where both of them nearly kill themselves.
And the crowd doesn't know what's going on because they've
No.
never seen anything like this.
No,
Right.
and like I said, Terry Funk, hasn't really been. He's been gone for almost a full year, and why is Terry Funk trying to kill Ric Flair? And that actually sets up for the first time in WCW history an I Quit match.
I do love the seamless transition from this long-term feud that we had, this 3-match series between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat, immediately sets up the next feud with Terry Funk.
You know who didn't love it? Was Ricky Steamboat. Steamboat didn't see that coming. He thought that since he lost the title, he'd get a rematch.
Interesting.
He thought there would be a 4th match in the series because it just made sense. So in that interview that I keep referencing, he says that he'd never really talked to Flair about it, just a little bit in passing. He said maybe he didn't want to say anything to me talking about Flair because we worked so much with each other and we grew the respect. He just didn't want to let me down. And Flair says in response to that, I wish I could have wrestled Steamboat forever. He was awesome. But Steamboat felt like it was a stab in the back. He felt like they didn't tell him what was going on. And he's just walking back up the ramp after he lost the belt. He's expecting another moment. He said it was a little bit of a sour moment for him. He said, I felt okay about losing the championship back to Flair because I always felt we'd have some great rematches. And then taking a look over my shoulder at what's going on with Funk, I said, it felt like a stab in the back. And I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, because like in 1990, Ricky goes back to WWF for like 1 appearance. So I think like that was because he was probably very upset by this.
They take the time, though, to show appreciation for Ricky Steamboat. You know, Ric Flair, gives him that high praise of being the best champion he's ever fought. And you've got a 3-match series going. You know, you don't want to beat this into the ground. If they do have a rematch, I think it would be a nice thing to do in the future. But, you just got there, Ricky. How about you do a nice little program with Sting? How about you do a nice little program with a few of the other guys they got going?
Well, I mean, after the I Quit match, the next opponent Ric Flair had was Sting. And that's what made Sting a megastar.
Sure, yeah.
They don't have a rematch, really, Steamboat and Flair, for 5 years after this.
It is disappointing to hear
It's like
that.
94, I think.
It's disappointing to hear that Ricky took that hard because I feel like that's just kind of part of the business.
Well, to me, like you're saying that you loved the seamless transition into
I loved
another
it, as a fan,
and I don't, because and only because I feel like we just saw what was the climax to the greatest trilogy in wrestling history to that point, arguably.
You wanted to give it room to breathe.
Like, I want some closure. Like, Flair's got... they're doing the fireworks. They're doing, like the interview with Flair. He's got the gold, and he's not being a heel. He's just saying, like, man, we went through a war, #WrestleWar, but we survived, and I came out on top, and I'm so grateful for that. And I think it would have had some time to breathe. I think would have really helped that moment. I understand how impactful it was for Terry Funk to do what he did. But for me, it's sort of like it eliminates the legitimacy of the judges being there, because now I know that they were only there so Funk could turn on Flair at the end. And it just, when I'm going to rank this match, I'm going to ignore that happened completely, because it lowers it for me. That's just a personal opinion.
That's so interesting. I do see it almost the opposite way.
Right.
I feel like having the judges there added legitimacy, and therefore was the perfect distraction, so that I could be completely flabbergasted when Terry Funk did what he did.
Oh, like kind of speaking to both your points is, I don't take the judges out, but you know what I think would have benefited this had they done this on like WCW Saturday Night. Like had the big championship celebration, like, oh man, Ric Flair, the new champion. And that's when Terry Funk attacks him. Because then you could have this be the big main event moment, and they could have more time, and you can have that post-match promo that you really, really, really needed from both men. And then that's when Terry attacks him.
Well, when we were watching this match, I said, what kind of bothers me is that there's 2 tag team matches after this. Like, it's not even the main event of the show. It pisses me off. But to Landon's point, like he said, it was because no one had ever seen anything like this before, where Terry Funk attacks Ric Flair. So they couldn't have ended the show like that. They had to do something else.
Oh, you would have started a riot if you ended the show right there.
Right. So it just feels like it's, to me, and I understand that I feel differently, and that's totally fine. It just feels like it takes away from how important this was supposed to be as sort of the blow-off match, the rubber match, to this incredible feud between the 2 greatest wrestlers on the planet.
I get that. I definitely get that.
Yeah. It almost, to me, it feels like WrestleMania. I can't remember if it was this past, it was like a WrestleMania 34 maybe, when it was only, or it might have been this WrestleMania where we had the Saudi show right after.
Yeah.
And so WrestleMania almost in some ways built towards the the Saudi show. Like
And then the Saudi
that's
show
not what it's about. Like
just,
WrestleMania is supposed to be the end. It's supposed to be the climax. It's not supposed to build towards something else.
Yeah.
And so that's the feeling that it gives me.
especially if we're building up to a show that like nobody wanted, and then was
yeah.
a major letdown.
Right. And that's a whole other story. But you get the point I'm trying to make.
So that wasn't your favorite moment of the match. What was your favorite moment of the match? Did you have a favorite moment of the match?
This is very interesting. Yes, is the short answer. We have to remember when we cover a match like this, we cannot look at it through 2019 eyes. We can't.
You can't.
You just can't, because it was a completely different world. Wrestling was a completely different thing.
30 years ago.
30 years ago, things evolve. But I there's a lot of this match that I really, really do appreciate. And, other than the suplexes, which from Flair are just beautiful.
Yeah, they are gorgeous.
They really, really are. I think if I had to pick a favorite, I love the entrances, because I love the sort of differences that they have between them that sort of really pit these two against each other as the type of people they are, the type of men that they are. But in the match itself, Flair giving that elbow across the throat of Steamboat, I think is brutal and gorgeous. But I really do like ultimately the knee across Steamboat's throat when he's talking to the ref. It's just...
That's absolutely my favorite moment of the
Yeah.
match.
That is just classic Flair doing stuff like that. For me, just like favorite moments, like I'm going to kind of echo you, just like the beautiful suplexes, even though we see, in my opinion, way too many of them. Ricky Steamboat's arm drags are just so beautiful. I think the reason why he does so many is because I'm like, look at this. Like, Jesus, like every time Rick goes almost completely vertical, and like Steamboat doesn't jump, he just turns over and like just has this beautiful rotation every single time.
What a maneuver.
What a maneuver! All right, there's your one per show.
Okay. Now is where we draw the line. I actually am not at all looking forward to ranking this match, even a little bit. Like partially because I know that no matter where we rank this, we're going to piss people off. Like, I just know that. And that's part of it. I think that's part of what being a wrestling fan is. And if you're going to throw yourself out there in front of the internet wrestling community, inevitably you will anger some people. However, we have to do this. We have to rank it. So this is our 13th match on the list. And the first question that we have to ask, is it in the top 10?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Agreed. Okay, so we got that far. So it's going to beat Triple H and Cactus Jack. It's going to beat Kurt Angle and Shane McMahon. And it's going to beat DIY and The Revival. Where to next?
Okay, so I've actually I thought about this a lot in the past day or so. Just from what I read doing my research and from watching it a few times, I'm like, it's much, much slower pace, but it's just masterful storytelling. So for me, even though it doesn't have the intensity or the octane of, say, our top 4 matches, I feel like it does match in... I'll give you a perfect example. So we put Mike Awesome Sato Tanaka as number 10. I feel like this match, despite nowhere near as brutal, but the storytelling and just the psychology and just the way they work that crowd I find it's superior, and that is purely that's like a personal taste type of thing. I'm sorry, number 9, excuse me. So definitely breaking the top 10 here. So the Royal Rumble 92, I found it a lot more exciting to watch than that. So when it starts getting difficult for me, I was like, ooh, did I enjoy it more than Eddie versus Ray?
Eddie and Ray right now tends to be our line.
It's the measuring stick, for
It
sure.
is. It's definitely it's the divide right now. That we have 2 types of matches on this list. They're either Eddie and Ray are better, or they're Eddie and Ray are worse. So where does this fall for you,
This is
Paul?
the hardest part for me, because as much as I want to put it at, say, number 5 or number 6, just the sheer fact that Eddie and Ray went out and had that match with 10 minutes to prepare, and they just gave us this probably my favorite cruiserweight match in the history of wrestling. Is this match more important? Oh, definitely, because Eddie and Ray, that was just like another spoke on the wheel. That was just another piece of their storytelling. That was not the culmination of a trilogy of what is considered to be some of the greatest wrestling matches of all time. So even though it might upset some people, I would put it above Eddie and Ray.
So you put it at 6?
I'm not done yet.
Okay.
Charlotte, Sasha, and Becky. That is a very, very important match for women's wrestling. So for me, I'm thinking it is on par with the importance of that match. And it's convenient because Ric Flair's daughter is in that match. So I'm thinking, me personally, I'm struggling between putting it at number 5 or number 6. That is just where I'm looking at it as.
So I'll jump in here because I'm kind of in the same boat. Whenever I think about where this match should go, whenever I think about where any match should go, I think about the discussion we just had for an hour, and I think about what is the closest match on the list that we've already ranked to that. And I do think it's Eddie versus Ray. It's a WCW match. It has some guys who are telling a story with their bodies. They didn't have a lot of time to prepare. There wasn't a whole lot of story going into the match previously. I do think for me, I would have to put it above Eddie versus Ray just because of the weight that this match carries.
Okay. To stand with you both, I also would put it above Eddie and Ray. So we've put it into the top 10. Now we put it into the top 7. So this is the first match in a while that's going to actually go above Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio. But there's still a lot of room to work with here within this top 6. So
right,
how are we feeling?
Like I said, right now I'm torn between putting it at number 5. I really want this match to be a top 5 match
So let's look at the top 5. Right, we've got Triple H and Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Steve Austin, Bret Hart versus Owen Hart, the X Division Championship 4-way, and then Trish versus Lita on Monday Night Raw. The X Division Championship 4-way. Remember who the referee for that match was?
Ricky Steamboat.
Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
I've forgotten that.
And so whenever I think about the kind of stuff that they were doing, and we talked about how relevant that was to have Ricky Steamboat in that moment, because he's all about X Division wrestling was what Ricky Steamboat was all about. That was his style. It wasn't about weight limits. It was about no limits. It was about, changing it up, keeping the fast pace. And I think as important as Trish versus Lita was for me, and that's, a personal feeling, it's very high on this list. It did shatter ceilings and lay the foundation for women's wrestling for the future. I think this match did that very same thing for a lot of people.
I do too. And my thing, and I think I've mentioned this in previous about as important as Trish and Lita is, we have to remember the next week we go right back to the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is
that's really important.
15 years before we finally got what they were trying to do.
So for me, I would put it at number 5 and not at number 4 above the X Division match, because the X Division match did the same thing in that it shattered ceilings and it set the mode. It raised the bar for what wrestling could be, and it still does to today. And honestly, if I was going to sit down and say, okay, which of these two would you rewatch first, it would definitely be the X Division Championship match. So I'm going to put it at number 5.
Okay. So that's really interesting, because so what you just said, you said if I was going to rewatch one of these matches, I would easily pick the X Division 4-way. That is absolutely probably true. They are also from 2 different eras. So this is very much apples to oranges. Like, this is why this is such a hard thing to rank.
It is.
Right? This is why it's so difficult, because we weren't born in 1989.
No, we were not.
We can't pretend that it's 1989 right now and we haven't seen everything else to come, because if that was the case, this would be number 1, no stories asked, we'd move on.
But
Exactly.
We can understand the legacy that the match left, and we can compare that to what we have up there.
Right. And so it's really hard, and this is why this list is difficult to put together, because there has to be a mix of classic with new.
Yeah.
There has to be, but there's no perfect formula to where they fit together.
No, there isn't.
There's just
There
not.
really isn't.
And so, like, just off of face value, like Landon said, like, I don't want to put it above the 4-way because that match was on a different level. It just was.
It's 13 years later. The business had changed so much.
Right.
And the endorsement came from Ricky Steamboat.
Yes,
Right.
it did.
However, I would put it at number 3 above Brett and Owen.
Really? Ooh.
And I'll tell you why. Because it's between two of the top wrestlers in the world at this time. Arguably, but really, right? So 2 of the top wrestlers in the world. It's 31 minutes. It's a fast pace for their time. It's an intense rivalry. It's the final match of a 3-part series. It's the match of the century at this point. And like Luther says, they've got all these judges that are there that make it legitimate. To me, it felt huge. It felt huge. And those other 2 matches, like the X Division Championship Fatal 4-Way, that felt big because it was such a big deal in the very new TNA, right? And it had its ties to NWA, so similarly to WrestleWar and the WCW World Heavyweight Championship belt. It feels more important to me than Brett and Owen because Brett and Owen was a big, big deal for that rivalry.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in its own bubble, it was massively important. But on a world scale, it wasn't super big. Whereas this match from Nashville, Tennessee, felt like it had worldwide implications.
I agree, and like to kind of piggyback off what you said, we did mention how the X Division 4-Way did have that stamp from Ricky, and also said that like at that point TNA was like the NWA, so it felt like the logical progression of this is what the NWA used to be, and this is what it's going to be going forward,
right?
And that does incline me to put it above it, as you said, just because we don't get this without like what came first.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's, I mean, why did we rank Trish and Lita above Sasha, Charlotte, and Becky? Not because it's a better match, because it's not.
It's more important.
But because it's more important. And that's why it gets 5 and over 6 right now. So I kind of think the same thoughts about this one.
And you have it going one step above to put it over Brett and Owen.
Yeah.
So for me, Brett and Owen is at number 3 because of the combination of the fact that it was such an amazing story and it was a technical masterpiece.
Yes.
It really was.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, that match was a big deal, but those 2 don't feud until like the next year. It's a year later before they actually start to have this world championship rivalry, which is a damn travesty because that's the best match on that card. And it should have been like,
and it was almost an afterthought.
It really
because
was.
Brett was in the world heavyweight title picture.
Yeah, an hour later he wins the title.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, Spencer, Paul, if you're in agreement, I think number 3 is a very fair spot.
I am in agreement actually, because as Brett and Owen is a match that's very important, but that should have been the main event for the belt.
I agree.
And if it was, then
if it was, we'd be having a different conversation.
It would definitely like, well, as much as I love Rick.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. Now, it should be noted that I am, again, ignoring the Terry Funk part of this after the match, because if I really think about it, that would bump this match down for me. Like, it just really, really would. But I'm trying to keep it in its own, like, this is what it was. And for that, I think it is 3. I think that's really, really fair.
I think it's 3.
Oh, I agree. But I was going to say real quick, if you hadn't have hated that point, I was going to point out how we don't get Mike Awesome and Satonaka you doing table spots without this pile driver on the outside. I want to point out
that's a good point. And listen, before you shout out that part of why Triple H and Shawn Michaels is number 1 is because of what happens after the match. That it happened between the 2 of them, which is why I still include it. Whereas this Terry Funk thing was a totally separate deal.
So okay, we put it at number 3. Mm-hmm. What about Bret Hart and Steve Austin beats this match out for you?
Well, we've talked about it 1,000 times. Bret and Steve did an amazing job of having this like top level storytelling while also having a very, very exciting match that melded technical masterpiece and just brawling, but not brawling for the sake of brawling, like very enjoyable brawling. They brawl.
Real. It was real.
They brawl in the crowd, and we don't go, oh, crowd brawl. Like, no, like, holy shit, they're brawling in the crowd. Like, Steve is using people's drink cups, and he's grabbing drink trays, and he's strangling people with the ropes, and then the we said it a million times. You're gonna hit it a million times. The best double turn in the history. Like, both of these men went into that match as one character, and they completely switched. And you just want to see it happen again.
I'm going to piggyback off of that because when I think about why Hart and Austin as number 2, I think about a quote that you said when we did that episode, Landon. You said, these two guys enter this match and come out completely different.
Yeah.
And it changes their careers. And quite frankly, it changes the WWF.
I completely agree.
It really did.
And that's why I think that match stays at 2 above 3, because these guys come out of this match the same. You still have all the, I mean, you grow in respect and you grow in love for these two guys. But they were the 2 best in the world going in. They're the 2 best in the world coming out.
Exactly. I agree.
Wow, what a match.
That was hard. That was so hard.
Number 3.
I am quite frankly surprised at us.
Like I said, my initial thing was like 5 or 6, and then after we discussed it, I'm like, you guys are absolutely right. And this is not me like conceding. Like, no, once we broke it down, I agree with you completely, both of you. I'm like, yeah.
I thought it was going to go right in the center so we could avoid being yelled at.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, like this is going to be a match that some people think should be higher than 3. They think it should be the top of our list. And there's going to be a lot of people that listen to the show, particularly ones that are younger, that are going to look at it and go, what the hell do you see in it? Like, this is number 20 on a list of 13 matches. Like that,
Yeah.
like that they're going to feel that way. And if you do, listen, we get it. Like we absolutely get it. And we are not saying that this was like, oh, we watched this 7 times because we loved it. We watched it 7 times because we had some trouble getting through it at first, if we're being totally honest. But it's really worth it, and it's really worth digging deep into it. And when you think about how important it is, and for that time period, how big of a match on such a big scale, 7 months after WCW is really starting to be a thing, it's a game changer. And it's a game changer as part of a 3-part series that defined wrestling at that time. And that's why it's so important.
I agree. This is like a time capsule into just such a different era of wrestling that, despite it being a little bit slower and like more focus on working holds and getting drama, just they can break out some really, really impressive things that even 30 years later we go, whoa, wow.
Completely agree.
Like I went and like, I'll be honest, I had never seen this match before, but I heard people talk about it. I expected fully to watch it and go, okay, cool. But there was no fewer than 10 times where I went, oh, wow.
Yeah, I popped pretty hard at a few moments in this match.
They did things that you don't see today that are like, holy shit, 30 years ago they were doing that?
This was a lot of fun, guys.
It really was. And we were really nervous that it wasn't going to be.
And so thanks to everyone who is still listening right now
Yes.
as we approach the 90-minute mark in this episode.
Oh, hey. Well, what's actually really, really interesting, and I wanted to bring this up while I ranked it. Flair and Steamboat both think this was not their best match. They think, because like Paul said, they wrestled each other like 2,000 times throughout the 70s and 80s. Like they just went at it over and over and over and over again. And both of them say they had matches at house shows that would have blew the pants off of any of these 3 matches that are part of this trilogy.
Well, if you want to go into that territory, after we watched DIY and the Revival, we all agreed that we saw this amazing house show match between them that we wish would have been televised so we could have talked about that one.
That was the greatest tag team match I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it wasn't televised.
Right.
What we saw at Takeover Toronto was about as close as they could get to that match without just redoing it identically.
So really, really an interesting thought just to think about how familiar Flair and Steamboat were with each other, and how, as good as we think this match was, it wasn't even their best, which is fascinating to me.
It just makes me think of something that Arn Anderson once said in an interview. Now, this is in character. This is like a kayfabe interview. He said that whenever you have so many matches with somebody, you learn their bodies better than their wives do.
That's
and
great.
I really feel like that applies to these two men, because like there are so many moments where there are these very, very interesting reversals that are done just because, well, they know each other so well, they know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
That's really a really great reference. I'm glad you said that. But this means inevitably our next match has to be from 2019. I mean, that's how this works. But yes, if you stuck all the way through with us, we cannot say thank you enough. This was really a very different experience for us. This is by far the match where we were most divided. I think as far as ranking goes, I think we that was definitely the longest discussion that we've had as far as ranking the match. It's going to be the one that I think is most divisive so far out of our list of 13. But 13 down, 86 to go. I cannot wait to see what's next. Guys, thank you so much for all of your participation, for all of your suggestions. If you do have a match that you want to suggest or you want to remind us that you suggested, trust me, we have it, and we have it in our database, and we're going to work on it and work on getting it out there to you. But definitely reach to us at Last Match Cast on Twitter. You can email us if we were wrong about any of this, which is altogether possible, at lastmatchstanding@gmail.com. And we also want to encourage you to vote on our ranker, the ranker.com/lastmatchstanding. Put this wherever you want. Yeah, I thought that 87 and 13 is 100, but I thought if we'd done 13, in my mind, I was just thinking, yeah, I'm aware. I don't know how math works currently.
Well,
we're only doing 99 matches.
We're delirious, so we've been watching too much wrestling.
Well, speaking about voting for matches, at this point we have gotten over 1,500 votes on the ranker. So please feel free to add to it. Tell us we're wrong by downvoting.
Yeah, keep voting, because we definitely don't vote on this ranker page ourselves, because this match and this page is all for you to rank these matches, because we're going to have our list. By the end of this, you're going to have your list on Ranker, and we're going to combine those things to come up with what is the Last Match Standing. So super important for you guys to go vote on that and let us know what you really think. Again, reach out to us anywhere that you'd like to. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, definitely share us, review us, rate us. We'd love to hear all that stuff. Share us wherever you are. That'd be great. And be on the lookout for some really new, exciting things coming from you guys at Last Match Standing. It's going to be really fun. But until then, from the Nashville Municipal Auditorium in 1989, I'm Spencer.
I'm Paul.
And I'm Landon.
And this is Last Match Standing.